Joseph, the beloved son. The early morning sun rose over the plains of Canaan, casting golden light over Jacob's sprawling camp. Among the flocks and herds, a young man of 17 stood apart, his face bright with the energy of youth and a deep sense of purpose. This was Joseph, the son of Jacob and Rachel, favored above all his brothers. Jacob's love for Joseph was evident to everyone, though it bred resentment in the hearts of his older sons. While the others toiled in the fields, Joseph often remained close to his father, learning the wisdom of their ancestors and dreaming of a future far greater than his brothers could imagine. One day, Jacob called Joseph into the tent, his weathered face breaking into a smile. "Come, my son," he said, "I have made something for you." From behind a woven chest, Jacob pulled out a garment unlike any other, a tunic of many colors, its fabric shimmering in the light. "This is for you," Jacob said, draping it over Joseph's shoulders. "May it remind you of my love and God's purpose for your life." Joseph beamed with pride, but outside the tent, hidden among the shadows, his brothers watched with darkened expressions. "Why does he love Joseph more than us?" muttered Simeon. "Doesn't he see how it divides the family?" Reuben, the eldest, placed a hand on his brother's shoulder. "We must not let anger consume us. But perhaps Joseph should learn not to flaunt his favor." That night, Joseph lay under the stars, dreaming as he often did. But this dream was different. In his mind's eye, he saw himself standing in a vast field. Bundles of grain surrounded him, and as he stood tall, the other sheaves bowed down to his. When he awoke, the dream lingered. Eager to share it, Joseph found his brothers and spoke with excitement. "Listen to the dream I had last night," he said. "We were binding sheaves of grain, and suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around and bowed down to mine." The brothers exchanged looks of disbelief and scorn. "Do you intend to reign over us?" said Judah. "Will you actually rule us?" Their anger burned hotter, but Joseph, unaware of the growing danger, only smiled. The sun crept higher over the hills of Canaan, casting long shadows over Jacob's flocks. Joseph wore his new coat proudly as he walked among his brothers. The vibrant colors glinted in the sunlight, a stark reminder of Jacob's favoritism. Each stitch seemed to fuel the brothers' jealousy. "Look at him," muttered Simeon, leaning on his staff, parading around like a king. Reuben, the eldest, sighed. "Father means well, but he doesn't see the rift he's creating." Joseph approached with a cheerful smile. "The flocks look well today," he said, oblivious to their simmering resentment. "I've just spoken to Father about moving them closer to the eastern pastures." Judah clenched his fists. "And what makes you think you're in charge, little brother? Is it your fancy coat or your ridiculous dreams?" Joseph blinked, taken aback by the hostility in Judah's voice. "I only meant to help." "Well, you're not helping," Levi snapped. "Why don't you go back to Father and leave the real work to you?" Joseph turned away, his heart heavy. He couldn't understand why his brothers disliked him so much. He had always sought their approval, but it seemed the more he tried, the more distant they became. That night, Joseph had another dream. In his vision, the sky was filled with celestial bodies, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars. They circled him, bowing low as if in submission. He awoke with a start, the image burning in his mind. At breakfast, Joseph shared his dream. "I saw the sun and moon and 11 stars bowing down to me." His brothers exchanged incredulous looks. Even Jacob furrowed his brow. "What is this dream you've had?" Jacob asked. "Shall your mother, your brothers, and I indeed bow down to you?" Though Jacob rebuked him, he pondered the dream in his heart. Could it be that God had a special plan for Joseph? Despite his musings, Jacob's response did little to ease the tension among the brothers. Days turned into weeks, and the rift widened. The brothers avoided Joseph, speaking in hushed tones whenever he was near. Only Benjamin, the youngest, remained close to him, finding comfort in his older brother's stories and dreams. One morning, Jacob called Joseph to his side. "Your brothers are grazing the flocks near Shechem," he said. "Go and see if all is well with them, and bring me back a report." Joseph nodded eagerly. "Of course, father." He set out, wearing his coat of many colors, the symbol of Jacob's favor. Along the way, he asked a passing traveler if he had seen his brothers. "They've moved on to Dothan," the man replied. Joseph continued his journey, unaware that his brothers had seen him approaching. From a distance, the multicolored coat was unmistakable. "Here comes the dreamer," sneered Simeon. "What shall we do with him?" Reuben hesitated. "Let us not kill him," he said. "Shed no blood. Instead, throw him into this pit here in the wilderness. That way, we won't have his blood on our hands." The others nodded in agreement, their hatred blinding them to reason. When Joseph arrived, they seized him, stripping him of his coat. He struggled, pleading with them to stop, but they ignored his cries. They threw him into a dry cistern, its walls steep and unforgiving. Joseph's voice echoed as he called out for help, but his brothers sat nearby, eating their meal as if nothing had happened. As they ate, a caravan of Ishmaelite traders appeared in the distance. Judah's eyes lit up with an idea. "What profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Let us sell him to the Ishmaelites. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh." The others agreed. They pulled Joseph from the pit and sold him for 20 pieces of silver. The traders bound Joseph and led him away, his cries fading into the distance. The brothers stood in silence, staring at the pile of silver coins. Guilt gnawed at Reuben, who had planned to rescue Joseph later. "What will we tell father?" he asked, his voice trembling. Levi picked up Joseph's coat, now dirt-streaked and torn. "We'll dip it in the blood of a goat," he said. "Father will think a wild animal devoured him." They carried out their plan, bringing the bloodied coat to Jacob. When he saw it, Jacob tore his clothes in anguish. "A wild animal has surely devoured him," he cried. Joseph has been torn to pieces. Jacob's grief was profound. He refused to be comforted, saying, "I will go to my grave mourning for my son." Meanwhile, Joseph was carried away to Egypt, where he was sold to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh. Though he was now a slave in a foreign land, God was with him, preparing him for the destiny that lay ahead. The scorching Egyptian sun beat down on the caravan as it entered the bustling city. Joseph, bound and weary, tried to take in his surroundings. The grandeur of Egypt was unlike anything he had ever seen. Towering monuments, marketplaces buzzing with life, and the wide Nile flowing through the land like a vein of life. Yet Joseph felt like a stranger, a prisoner in a land far from his father's house. The Ishmaelite traders led him to a slave market, where buyers inspected their human goods like cattle. Among the crowd stood Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard. His sharp eyes fell on Joseph, and he noted the young man's strength and intelligence. "I'll take him," Potiphar said, tossing a bag of silver to the trader. Joseph was led to Potiphar's grand house, a place of wealth and authority. Though Joseph was a slave, he resolved in his heart to remain faithful to God. "The Lord is with me," he whispered to himself. "He will not abandon me." Joseph's diligence and integrity soon caught Potiphar's attention. Whatever task he was given, he completed with excellence. Over time, Potiphar entrusted him with more responsibilities, eventually making him overseer of his entire household. Under Joseph's management, Potiphar's estate flourished. Potiphar often marveled at Joseph's wisdom. "There is something about you, Joseph," he remarked one day. "Your God must surely be with you." Joseph smiled humbly. "The Lord blesses all that I do because of his faithfulness." As Joseph's reputation grew, so did the admiration of those around him. However, not all attention was welcome. Potiphar's wife, captivated by Joseph's appearance and demeanor, began to pursue him. One day, when the house was quiet, Potiphar's wife approached Joseph. "Come lie with me," she whispered, her voice dripping with seduction. Joseph stepped back, his heart pounding. "How could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" he replied firmly. Day after day, she attempted to lure him, but Joseph remained steadfast. One afternoon, she cornered him, grabbing his cloak. "Lie with me," she demanded. Joseph tore himself away, leaving his cloak in her hands as he fled the house. Humiliated and furious, she concocted a lie. Calling the household servants, she showed them Joseph's cloak and accused him of trying to assault her. When Potiphar returned home and heard the false accusation, his anger burned. Without investigating further, he had Joseph thrown into the king's prison. The prison was a dark, desolate place, but even there, the Lord was with Joseph. The warden soon noticed Joseph's trustworthiness and placed him in charge of the other prisoners. One day, two of Pharaoh's officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, were thrown into the prison. Joseph, noticing their troubled expressions, asked, "Why do you look so downcast today?" "We each had a dream," the cupbearer replied, "but there is no one to interpret them." Joseph smiled gently. "Interpretations belong to God. Tell me your dreams." The cupbearer described his dream. A vine with 3 branches blossomed, and its grapes were pressed into Pharaoh's cup. Joseph listened intently and then said, "The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will restore you to your position." Encouraged, the baker shared his dream. 3 baskets of bread sat on his head, but birds came and ate the bread. Joseph's face grew somber. "The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will hang you, and the birds will eat your flesh." Both dreams came true as Joseph had said. Before the cupbearer was released, Joseph made a plea. "Remember me when you are back in Pharaoh's service. Speak to him about me, that I may be freed." The cupbearer promised, but once restored to his position, he forgot about Joseph. 2 years passed, and Joseph remained in prison. Then one night, Pharaoh was troubled by 2 dreams. In the first, 7 fat cows grazed by the Nile, followed by 7 thin cows that devoured them. In the second, 7 plump heads of grain were swallowed by 7 thin, scorched heads of grain. None of Pharaoh's magicians or wise men could interpret the dreams. The cupbearer, suddenly remembering Joseph, said, "There is a young Hebrew in the prison who interpreted my dream. Perhaps he can help." Pharaoh summoned Joseph immediately. After shaving and changing his clothes, Joseph stood before the mighty ruler of Egypt. "I hear you can interpret dreams," Pharaoh said. Joseph replied humbly, "I cannot, but God will give Pharaoh the interpretation." Pharaoh recounted his dreams, and Joseph explained, "The dreams are one and the same. The 7 fat cows and 7 plump heads of grain represent 7 years of abundance. The 7 thin cows and scorched heads of grain represent 7 years of famine. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. Store up grain during the years of abundance so that Egypt may survive the famine." Pharaoh was impressed. "Can we find anyone like this man, in whom is the Spirit of God?" he asked his advisers. He appointed Joseph as governor over all of Egypt, second only to Pharaoh himself. Joseph, now dressed in fine linen and adorned with Pharaoh's signet ring, traveled throughout Egypt, overseeing the collection of grain. The land flourished during the 7 years of abundance, and Joseph stored vast amounts of food in preparation for the famine. When the famine began, it struck not only Egypt, but the surrounding nations as well. People from all over came to Egypt to buy grain, and Joseph became known for his wisdom and fairness. One day, among the crowd seeking food, Joseph saw a group of men that made his heart stop, his brothers. They bowed low before him, not recognizing the Egyptian official as their long-lost sibling. Joseph stood silently, his heart pounding as he gazed at the men before him. It had been years since he had seen his brothers, yet he recognized them immediately. Their faces were older, their clothing tattered from travel, but they were unmistakable. They bowed before him, just as his dreams had foretold. "Where do you come from?" Joseph demanded, his voice stern and unfamiliar to them. "From the land of Canaan," they replied, their heads bowed. "We have come to buy food." Joseph fought back the emotions surging within him. His first instinct was to reveal himself, but he needed to test their hearts. Were they the same men who had sold him into slavery? Did they regret their actions? "You are spies," Joseph accused, narrowing his eyes. "You have come to see where our land is unprotected." "No, my lord," Reuben protested, his voice trembling. "We are honest men. Your servants are brothers, sons of one man. We are 12 in total, but one is no more, and the youngest is with our father in Canaan." Joseph's heart wrenched at the mention of Benjamin and their father Jacob, but he maintained his composure. "If you are honest men, prove it. One of you must stay here while the rest return with your youngest brother. Then I will know you speak the truth." The brothers looked at one another in fear. "What is this God has done to us?" they murmured, guilt etched on their faces. Simeon was chosen to remain behind, and the rest were allowed to return to Canaan with sacks of grain. But Joseph secretly ordered his servants to place the silver they had used to pay for the grain back into their sacks. As the brothers journeyed home, they stopped to rest and opened their sacks of grain. To their horror, each man discovered his silver returned. "What is this?" Judah exclaimed. "How can we face the Egyptian governor again?" When they reached Canaan, they told Jacob everything. "The man in charge of Egypt was harsh with us," Reuben explained. "He accused us of being spies and demanded we bring Benjamin to prove our honesty." Jacob's face darkened. "You have bereaved me of my children. Joseph is no more, and now you would take Benjamin from me as well. All these things are against me." Reuben pleaded, "Send Benjamin with me. I will take responsibility for him. If anything happens to him, you may hold me accountable." But Jacob refused. "My son shall not go down with you. If harm should befall him, it would bring my gray head down to the grave in sorrow." As the months passed, the famine grew severe. The grain they had brought from Egypt dwindled, and Jacob reluctantly called his sons together. "Go back and buy us more food," he said. Judah spoke up. "The man warned us we would not see his face again unless we brought Benjamin. Send the boy with me, and I will ensure his safety." Jacob sighed heavily. "If it must be so, then take gifts for the man, a little balm, honey, spices, and myrrh. And take twice the silver, in case it was an oversight that the first payment was returned. May God Almighty grant you mercy before the man, so that he may release Simeon and let Benjamin return." With heavy hearts, the brothers set out for Egypt once more, this time accompanied by Benjamin. When the brothers arrived in Egypt, Joseph saw Benjamin among them and was deeply moved. He instructed his steward to bring them to his house and prepare a feast. The brothers were frightened. "Why are we being brought to his house?" they whispered. "Is it because of the silver that was returned in our sacks? Will he seize us as slaves?" At Joseph's house, the steward reassured them. "Peace be with you," he said. Your God, and the God of your father, must have given you treasure in your sacks. I received your payment. Simeon was released, and the brothers were brought before Joseph. When Joseph saw Benjamin, his youngest brother, he was overcome with emotion and excused himself to weep in private. After composing himself, Joseph returned and ordered the meal to be served. To the brothers' astonishment, they were seated in the exact order of their birth. Portions were served, but Benjamin's was 5 times larger than the others. The brothers marveled, but Joseph watched them closely. Were they jealous of Benjamin, as they had been of him? The next morning, Joseph ordered his steward to fill the brothers' sacks with grain and return their silver. He also instructed him to place his personal silver cup in Benjamin's sack. As the brothers departed, Joseph sent his men after them. "Why have you repaid good with evil?" they accused. "Why have you stolen my master's silver cup?" The brothers were shocked. "Far be it from us to do such a thing," they said. "If any of us is found with the cup, he shall die, and the rest of us will become your slaves." The steward searched their sacks, starting with the eldest and ending with Benjamin. When the cup was found in Benjamin's sack, the brothers tore their clothes in anguish. They returned to Joseph's house and threw themselves at his feet. "What can we say, my lord?" Judah pleaded. "God has uncovered our guilt. We are now your slaves." Joseph replied, "Only the one who was found with the cup will remain my slave. The rest of you may go in peace." Judah stepped forward, his voice trembling with emotion. "My lord, I beg you to listen. My father's life is bound up with the boy's life. If we return without him, our father will die in sorrow. I pledge to protect Benjamin. Take me as your slave instead, but let the boy go." Joseph could no longer contain himself. He ordered everyone except his brothers to leave the room. Then, with tears streaming down his face, he cried out, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" The brothers were speechless, their faces pale with fear. "Do not be afraid," Joseph said, embracing them. "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to save many lives. Go quickly and bring my father here." Joseph's brothers stood in stunned silence, unable to process the words they had just heard. Could it be true? The powerful governor of Egypt, the man they feared, was their own brother Joseph, whom they had betrayed and sold into slavery so many years ago. Joseph stepped closer, his voice softening. "Come near to me, please," he said. Trembling, the brothers approached him. Joseph embraced them, tears streaming down his face. "It is I, Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. But do not be distressed or angry with yourselves, for God sent me ahead of you to preserve life." As Joseph's words sank in, the brothers began to weep, overwhelmed with relief and guilt. Judah knelt before him. "We do not deserve your mercy, brother," he said. Joseph lifted Judah to his feet. "It is not for you to bear this burden alone. What you meant for harm, God used for good. He sent me ahead of you to save our family and many others. Now hurry back to our father and bring him here. Tell him that his son Joseph is alive and ruler over all Egypt." Joseph instructed them to bring their families and livestock to Egypt, where they would live in the fertile land of Goshen. He provided them with carts, provisions, and garments for the journey. To Benjamin, he gave 5 sets of clothing and 300 pieces of silver. "Do not quarrel on the way," Joseph warned gently as they departed. The brothers left Egypt with hearts full of awe and gratitude, eager to deliver the miraculous news to their father. Back in Canaan, Jacob sat in his tent, weary from the years of famine and grief. His sons entered, their faces alight with excitement and nervousness. "Father," Judah said, kneeling before him, "Joseph is alive. He is the governor of Egypt, and he has sent for us to join him there." Jacob's eyes widened in disbelief. "Joseph? Alive? How can this be? You told me he was dead." The brothers exchanged guilty glances. Finally, Reuben stepped forward. "Father, we were wrong. We sold Joseph into slavery, and he has now risen to a position of great power. He has forgiven us and wishes to see you." At first, Jacob could not believe their words, but when he saw the carts and provisions Joseph had sent, his spirit revived. "My son Joseph is still alive. I will go and see him before I die." Jacob and his entire household set out for Egypt, a caravan of hope and anticipation. Along the way, God appeared to Jacob in a vision at Beersheba. "Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt," God said. "I will make you a great nation there. I will go with you to Egypt, and I will surely bring you back again. And Joseph will close your eyes." Strengthened by God's promise, Jacob continued the journey. When they reached Egypt, Joseph rode out in his chariot to meet his father. As soon as he saw Jacob, Joseph ran to him and embraced him tightly, weeping uncontrollably. "Now I am ready to die," Jacob said, tears streaming down his face, "since I have seen for myself that you are still alive." Joseph brought his father and brothers to Pharaoh. Jacob, now an old man, blessed Pharaoh, saying, "May the God of my fathers bless you." Pharaoh welcomed Jacob's family and granted them the land of Goshen, the best pasture land in Egypt. There, the family thrived. Joseph provided them with food and resources during the remaining years of the famine. Despite the hardships of the past, the family experienced peace and prosperity in Egypt. Jacob often marveled at how God had worked through Joseph to preserve their lineage. As Jacob's life drew to a close, he called his sons to his bedside to bless them. One by one, he spoke prophetic words over each son, declaring their futures and the destinies of their tribes. To Judah, he gave the greatest promise: "The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he to whom it belongs shall come, and the obedience of the nations shall be his." This was a foreshadowing of the Messiah who would come through Judah's lineage. After blessing his sons, Jacob instructed them to bury him in the cave of Machpelah, where Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, and Rebekah were buried. Then, surrounded by his family, Jacob breathed his last and was gathered to his people. Joseph, heartbroken, yet determined to honor his father, sought Pharaoh's permission to bury Jacob in Canaan. Pharaoh granted his request, and Joseph, along with his brothers and a grand Egyptian procession, carried Jacob's body to the cave of Machpelah. The journey was marked by solemnity and reverence, a fitting tribute to the patriarch who had seen God's promises unfold in his lifetime. After the burial, the family returned to Egypt. After Jacob's death, the brothers feared that Joseph might now seek revenge. They approached him, saying, "Before he died, our father commanded us to ask for your forgiveness." Joseph wept when he heard their words. "Do not be afraid," he said. "Am I in the place of God? You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring about the salvation of many lives. So do not fear. I will provide for you and your families." Joseph's kindness reassured his brothers, and they lived in harmony for the rest of their days. Joseph lived to see 3 generations of his descendants. As his life neared its end, he called his brothers together and said, "I am about to die, but God will surely come to your aid and take you up out of this land to the land he promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. When that time comes, carry my bones up from this place." Joseph died at the age of 110, and his body was embalmed and placed in a coffin in Egypt, awaiting the day when his people would return to the Promised Land. The story of Joseph and his brothers is a testament to God's faithfulness, sovereignty, and ability to redeem even the darkest moments for his greater purpose. Through Joseph's trials and triumphs, the foundation was laid for the growth of a nation that would fulfill God's promises to Abraham. Thank you for watching this retelling of the story of Joseph and his brothers, a powerful narrative of faith, forgiveness, and God's sovereignty. This timeless story reminds us that even in the darkest moments, God can turn what was meant for evil into something good. Joseph's journey from betrayal to reconciliation teaches us about resilience, humility, and the importance of trusting God's plan. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring Bible stories and life lessons. Let us know in the comments what other stories you'd like to hear next. Until next time, remember, no matter what challenges you face, God is always working behind the scenes for your good. Stay blessed, and we'll see you in the next video.